In 1887, in the village of Blackwood, Massachusetts, 14 boys from the same school were found kneeling in perfect rows on the dirt floor of a woodshed behind the Blackwood Unitarian Hall, their eyes closed as if in prayer. But each of them had scratched identical phrases into the backs of their own hands with sewing needles. None remembered doing it. The headmaster, Everett Lyle, an austere man with silver-buttoned vests and a permanent tremor in his jaw, insisted it was a prank. Yet over the following weeks, dozens of residents, men and women, school teachers, postmen, mill workers, reported having the exact same dream, an image of themselves falling backward into a well, unable to scream. The local physician began keeping a ledger, noting the descriptions, dates, and symptoms. By July, 27 adults had filed nearly identical complaints, using almost the same words. In 1886, a textile mill opened nearby, bringing coal dust, low wages, and a constant ringing from the shift bells. Blackwood was small, damp, and hard-packed with soot. The school's attendance log from October 3, 1887, lists 5 boys absent with nosebleeds and hallucinations. What was everyone in Blackwood being drawn toward? Respected for its high literacy rate and clean ledgers, Blackwood School was a model of discipline and moral instruction, where the smell of chalk and boiled wool filled the hallways. But when the physician's dream log was matched to a forgotten inquest from 1882, a precise repeating phrase appeared 27 times, and the denials began to unravel. In the village of Blackwood, there was a time when silence meant safety. Nestled between the soot-lined edges of the North Middlesex rail line and the thinning birchwoods that marked the town's western boundary, Blackwood had been a quiet mill village of less than 300 residents. By early spring of 1887, however, silence no longer felt natural. It felt expectant. Mrs. Luann Fielding, widow of a brakeman and longtime church organist, was the first to document a change she couldn't quite describe. In her personal ledger, found decades later among probate records, she recorded on March 3rd, "Woke again to a sound like someone speaking from the inside of the wall, no one outside. 3:47 a.m. Marked the hour. It was the third such entry in 2 weeks. At the time, the village of Blackwood operated 2 communal institutions: the primary school where Everett Lyle presided with daily attendance logs and ink-stained cuffs, and the Unitarian Hall, which also functioned as the community's records office. Behind the hall stood the small wooden shed, no longer used for storage but left unlocked. It was this shed where the 14 boys were found, in eerie formation, with needle marks and identical words gouged faintly into their skin. Deputy Harmon Orville, dispatched from the Worcester Sheriff's Office, had filed a brief report citing no sign of forced entry, no indication of illicit substances or group agitation. He called it ritual mimicry among adolescent males. But several of the boys were later taken to Boston for examination. One of them, 11-year-old Grant Whitlow, recounted under questioning, "I was cold, but I knew I was going to the bottom. I saw a circle of eyes at the edge of the pit. Then nothing." When asked who had told him to write on his skin, he replied, "No one, it was just the rule." A pattern began to form that spring. The town physician, Dr. Ellis Corwin, began receiving a new kind of patient complaint: episodes of inexplicable dread just before dawn, followed by nosebleeds, sometimes vomiting, always accompanied by an intense ringing in the ears. "Like a bell underwater," one woman described it. Another, a former mill worker named Tobias Finney, said he could taste iron in his mouth for hours after waking. Dr. Corwin, methodical and skeptical, initially suspected coal exposure or high stress from mill labor. He requested dust samples from the factory foreman, which came back clean. His examination of the village well, one of 2 main water sources, revealed no toxins. Still, by mid-May, he had recorded 17 separate cases of identical dream phenomena. His dream ledger, a narrow volume bound in green cloth, lists the same phrase on pages 4, 7, 9, and 11. "I was falling backward into the dark, and I could not scream." The schools remained open. Headmaster Lyle, ever devoted to order, dismissed the events as a flurry of nervous mimicry during a spring marked by early storms and unseasonable humidity. But the morning of May 19th brought an incident that strained even his sense of rational control. During composition hour, a girl named Mary Prentice began tearing pages from her copybook, silently one by one, until the pile formed a neat square beside her desk. When Lyle approached and placed a hand on her shoulder, she looked at him and whispered, "They're underneath." "Underneath what?" Lyle demanded. But Mary's eyes had glazed. Her lips kept moving, soundlessly. She collapsed minutes later. Neighbors began to notice changes, not in behavior alone, but in the air itself. The Blackwood seamstress, Miss Arlene Cooper, described a static tension in the parlor room, like the moment before lightning hits, only it never did. Laundry refused to dry even in direct sun. Candles burned lower than usual. Twice on windless nights, curtains lifted inward as if pulled from outside. On June 4th, the Blackwood Courier, a weekly single-sheet publication printed in Fitchburg, carried a column of small-town notices and deaths. Sandwiched between a wedding announcement and a livestock sale was a brief entry. A number of schoolboys and residents have reported similar nighttime terrors. The town physician is collecting statements. No confirmed cause. Behind the editorial neutrality, anxiety spread. A local tinsmith, Jonah Beale, withdrew from his routine visits to the square, sending his apprentice instead. When visited at home by Dr. Corwin on June 9th for a follow-up to a stomach complaint, Beale refused to open the door. From inside, Corwin heard the metallic scrape of a file, repeated steadily. A week later, Beale was admitted to the Boston asylum, no longer speaking coherently. Among his belongings was a journal containing nothing but diagrams of circles within circles. At the center of each was a phrase written backward. "I saw myself waiting." Only one member of the town council raised the possibility of an environmental factor in open session, Mr. Paul Hardin, owner of the grain depot, suggested on June 12th that the recent expansion of the textile mill and changes in wind direction could be affecting the air quality. He was dismissed immediately. The minutes record his comment as overreaction. By the third week of June, the surrounding woods grew oddly silent. Songbirds disappeared. 2 hunting parties reported deer carcasses found uneaten, eyes missing. In each case, the carcasses were untouched otherwise. The dogs refused to go near them. One man, an outlier, claimed to have found something. Caleb Morton, the retired postmaster, said he had been walking near the ridge above the birchwood when he saw what he called a mouth in the ground, pressed by Dr. Corwin and a deputy, he clarified. A collapsed root cellar or well of unknown origin, its opening barely wider than a man's shoulders. He said he had felt drawn toward it, like a draft down the spine. He did not go back. 2 weeks later, Caleb was found dead in his barn. Coroner's report cardiac arrest. The Blackwood School, now under increased scrutiny from regional health officials, received a formal letter of inquiry from the Massachusetts Bureau of Education on June 28th. Headmaster Lyle was instructed to submit detailed records of behavioral disturbances, curriculum changes, and environmental conditions. His reply, archived at the Massachusetts Historical Society, reads, "The students remain productive, orderly, and observant. The panic arises not from them, but from those who refuse to discipline their minds." 2 days later, Everett Lyle's niece, a 13-year-old boarding in his home, woke screaming. According to housemaid Eleanor Voss, the girl had been sleepwalking into the yard, muttering numbers. On her palms, faint pencil marks formed the outline of a ladder. She could not recall making them. The next morning, Lyle was seen burning her schoolbooks in the garden incinerator. By early July, the ledger at Dr. Corwin's office contained 27 dream cases. Of those, 19 described not only the fall into darkness, but the feeling of being watched from above just before falling. One woman, the mill accountant's wife, stated in her July 5th interview, "It was like a game or a ritual. I had to wait my turn. I knew I would be next." With each entry, Corwin grew more convinced that the phenomenon was not medical, but systemic. Something in the town's patterns, its bells, its rhythms, its repetitions, had become corrupted. Something was instructing people, and still no one left. The first external observer to stay more than a day in Blackwood was Elias Trammell, a junior clerk from the Massachusetts Bureau of Sanitation. He arrived on July 9, 1887, under orders to inspect the well systems and confirm the absence of chemical contaminants following Dr. Corwin's requests. Trammell, aged 24, unmarried and newly stationed in Boston, described the village in his first report as peculiarly quiet, unnaturally symmetrical in layout, and visibly unwelcoming. He noted the birdsong ceased entirely once his carriage passed the outer boundary trees. He lodged in the parsonage behind the Unitarian Hall. That night, he was awakened not by noise but by its absence. The bells, which marked each quarter hour by order of the mill since 1886, had not rung. According to his written account, the silence woke him as surely as a siren. By morning, several villagers had gathered near the bell tower. No one touched the mechanism, though nothing appeared broken. Trammell recorded one remark overheard from a mill worker named Hugh Marston. It stopped because it saw something. The bells resumed later that day without intervention. By July 12th, Trammell had completed preliminary testing of the wells and stream bed. Water samples were clear of industrial runoff, though he made a personal note about the smell. Sweet metallic edge suggests mineral presence not on register. The Bureau found nothing actionable. Trammell was instructed to close the file and return to Boston. He remained in Blackwood 3 extra days voluntarily. His journal from that time, preserved in the Bureau archive, contains abrupt tonal shifts. The entry for July 13th reads, "Found the schoolhouse empty at mid-morning, doors ajar, ink pooled on 3 desks, no sign of students or Headmaster Lyle, odor of mildew strong inside, air unusually still. He found the students shortly after, gathered along the riverbed, arranged in rows again, seated this time, unmoving. Lyle stood behind them, hands behind his back, watching the water. None spoke. Trammell approached him and asked what the children were doing. Lyle's response recorded exactly, "They're learning to hold still. The deeper currents don't like disruption." Trammell did not question further. He returned to the parsonage, packed his belongings and left by the 6 p.m. coach. He would later submit an amended report, omitting the Riverside encounter, stating instead that the town appeared oddly choreographed and internally harmonious in a manner uncharacteristic of rural populations. Meanwhile, the children began showing signs of withdrawal. Several stopped responding during lessons. One, Henry Samuels, had to be physically lifted from his desk after failing to stand for dismissal. His hands were clenched around a broken pencil. He would not speak for 6 days. Parents began to report missing objects from their homes, pages torn from Bibles, sewing needles, small lengths of cord, pins, and chalk. Nothing valuable. One mother, Evelyn Clark, told Dr. Corwin that she found her son digging in the pantry wall with a spoon. When she asked why, he said he was making a place for the sound. The behavior was mirrored by adults in subtler forms. Jonah Beale's apprentice was seen scribbling symbols on ledgers, replacing numbers with concentric rings. A Sunday sermon at the Unitarian Hall was interrupted when Reverend Moxley froze mid-sentence and whispered, "It's already beneath us," then stepped down from the pulpit and walked out. He resigned 2 days later without explanation. Dr. Corwin, overwhelmed, reached out again, this time to the Middlesex Lunacy Commission, requesting evaluation support. No officials responded. In his own writings, he speculated that any escalation into official channels might be blocked. "I suspect the Bureau considers us a local eccentricity, not a crisis," he wrote. Or worse, they've seen this pattern before. By mid-July, 2 more children collapsed during school hours. Both were found with identical marks scratched behind their ears. Not words this time, but symbols, vertical lines intersected by broken circles. Everett Lyle claimed the injuries were self-inflicted and suspended both students. That evening, he was seen burying something in the garden behind the school. The groundskeeper, Walter Bird, noted it to Dr. Corwin. Looked like notebooks, maybe more. Bird himself would vanish days later. His shed remained locked from the inside. When forced open, it was empty save for rows of children's shoes stacked neatly along the far wall. 11 pairs. None were missing from the school. The dream pattern continued. On July 20th, Corwin attempted an experiment. He requested 6 adult residents keep a strict diary of dreams for 1 week, writing them down immediately upon waking. By the third day, 4 of them had identical entries. A stone room, the feel of water rising, the silence of waiting. One, Jacob Heller, reported waking to find damp footprints on the floorboards leading to his bedside. He lived alone. A day later, Heller was seen walking into the woods without his coat. Witnesses said he moved slowly as if in trance. He did not return. The search party failed to find him, though 2 members refused to go near the edge of the ridge, citing a change in air pressure and a sound that didn't belong. The inquest into the original 1882 death, long forgotten, was reopened quietly by Dr. Corwin, using his limited authority as town physician. He reviewed the file kept in the hall's basement archives. It referred to a death listed as accidental. Thomas Bly, age 36, fell into an abandoned root cellar during surveying work. No follow-up investigation had been ordered, but one attachment caught Corwin's attention: a torn journal entry retrieved from Bly's person. In faded ink, it read, "Every movement we make is marked. They are only still when we are." By the final week of July, fear had settled into routine. People went to work. The mill ran 3 shifts. The school remained open. But faces grew blanker. Greetings grew mechanical. A kind of somnambulist obedience governed daily life. The air felt thick. Smoke from cooking fires lingered hours longer than usual. Bread failed to rise. Soap left a strange residue on the skin. And yet, no one left. No announcements were made. No quarantines, no church decrees. Yet something unmistakable had shifted. It was as if the town had agreed, wordlessly, not to provoke whatever was now listening. Only Corwin continued to record. He visited a boy named Elias Bryn, age 9, confined to bed for 3 days after a severe night episode. Corwin found him awake but entirely silent, eyes fixed on the ceiling. When asked what he had seen, Elias raised one hand and gestured, a simple motion as if lifting a lid. Then he whispered, "It's watching through us." On August 1st, 1887, the Blackwood anomaly finally breached its local boundaries. A column appeared in the Boston Morning Journal, authored by a young reporter named Clara Densmore, under the heading, "Silent Town, Strange Sleep Phenomena in Rural Massachusetts." The article, written in cautious language, referenced patterns of dream repetition, altered behavior among children, and unusual stillness in public spaces. No names were included, no photographs printed. Yet within days, 3 separate individuals arrived in Blackwood to investigate, none of whom had received official sanction. The first was Reverend Simon Fowle, a Presbyterian minister from nearby Bolton, who believed the rumors pointed to a moral contagion. The second was Inspector Harold Kinsey, a retired Pinkerton operative with private ties to the Massachusetts Board of Corrections. The third, and least welcome, was Clara Densmore herself, who arrived by rail with a pocket notebook, a compact camera, and a pressed grey dress that would quickly become dust-streaked from Blackwood's brittle roads. They met by coincidence in front of the mill on the afternoon of August 4th. Each had independently been denied access to town records. Reverend Fowle had attempted to speak at the Unitarian Hall and found the doors locked. Kinsey had requested the school's attendance books from Headmaster Lyle and been told they were misplaced in reorganization. Densmore had tried to speak with Dr. Corwin and was told he was out of town, despite seeing him pass in a carriage 2 hours later, not acknowledging her presence. Still, they stayed. Fowle took lodging at the depot house, Kinsey at the rear room of the apothecary, and Densmore, unusually, was hosted by the school's cleaning woman, Miss Adeline Purser, who had grown uneasy and wanted someone from outside to see what she could not explain. That night, Densmore heard Adeline speaking aloud in her sleep, repeating numbers in a near chant, 28, 41, 6, 2, 28, 41, 6, 2. The next morning, Adeline remembered nothing. But when Densmore visited the school to photograph the exterior, she saw a small equation scratched into the wooden doorframe. 28, 4, 7, 2x35. The numbers were the same. Meanwhile, Reverend Fowle attempted to convene an open-air prayer meeting near the river's edge. Only 3 townspeople attended, all older women. During his reading of Psalm 77, one of them began humming low, not quite in tune. Fowl paused. The second woman began to sway. The third whispered a single word, below. Fowl broke off the reading and closed his Bible. That evening, he recorded his impression in a letter never sent. There is scripture here, yes, but it is older than us. And it has already been memorized. Kinsey, though cynical by nature, began taking detailed statements. He spoke with 3 parents, all of whom denied that their children had suffered night disturbances. Yet he overheard a child outside the bakery reciting a list of names, none of them local. He jotted the names down. Marion, Silas, Coralie, Tom. Marion, Silas, Coralie, Tom. When he asked the child who they were, she said, "They're who I'll be if I'm chosen." Kinsey's concern grew sharper. He returned to the hall and forced entry late on August 5th, breaking a small side window and slipping through. Inside he found shelves stripped of most files. Only 6 volumes remained, ledgers from 1879 and 1880, a crop registry, a hymnal, and 1 journal labelled Miskitchewan Correspondence. But none contained anything after 1882. The walls, however, had markings. Near the floorboards in the rear chamber, once used for town marriage records, Kinsey found a grid of faint scratches, symmetrical, some still coated in a layer of chalk dust. They formed a crude circle, intersected by notches. He copied them onto his notepad and left before dawn. The following day, Clara Densmore attempted to confront Headmaster Lyle directly. She waited outside the school during morning assembly. At 9:03 a.m., the children filed in. At 9:17 they emerged again, each holding a single folded paper. Lyle stood in the doorway unspeaking. The children approached Densmore silently, handed her their papers, and continued walking in single file down the road toward the river. Inside the folds, each note contained only 1 sentence written in block letters. "It helps if we stop thinking." All were signed, "Me." When Densmore returned to the house, she discovered that her camera plates had been removed. Her notebook, which she had left in the parlor, was untouched, but the word reversal had been written on the last blank page in unfamiliar handwriting. Adeline Purser, confronted, denied entering the room at all, but her hands smelled of charcoal. Kinsey, now working separately, attempted to verify old census records to confirm population trends. He found that all census data for Blackwood between 1880 and 1885 had been consolidated under the district of Ashby, and none of the names matched. Even Corwin's name did not appear in Boston medical registries. Kinsey traveled briefly to Fitchburg to consult regional archives. When he returned with a copy of a 1882 inquest ledger regarding Thomas Bly's death, he found his boarding room emptied, his belongings missing. Only one thing remained on the bed, a map of the village, marked with 3 red ink circles, each one corresponding to an entrance to underground spaces: the disused coal storage beneath the mill, the root cellar near the western woods, and the basement of the school. That night a child went missing. Her name was Clara Fairweather, aged 10. She had not shown symptoms prior. Her parents claimed she had spoken normally at supper and gone to bed. But by morning the bedding was cold, the window open, and a small pair of shoes stood in the middle of the floor facing inward. A search was organized, involving Kinsey and Fowl. Densmore too participated, recording notes and describing the rising sense of friction among villagers. "They no longer react to loss," she wrote. "They fold it into the rhythm." On August 9th, the search halted. Clara's bonnet was found near the base of a hollow tree at the ridge. Inside the tree trunk, initials had been carved. Not hers, but the same 4 names from before: Marion, Silas, Coralie, Tom. A 5th was freshly added: Clara. Doctor. Corwin would not speak to any of the outsiders. When Kinsey forced a meeting at the apothecary, Corwin only repeated, "We are inside something now. It does not want us seen from outside." Reverend Fowl attempted to deliver one final sermon in the square, addressing the full town. Only 17 people came. During his reading from Lamentations, 2 children began humming again. This time several adults joined in. At the sermon's end, Fowl wept. That night he left town without taking his possessions. Only Densmore and Kinsey remained, and the bells began ringing again, every 15 minutes, but not in time with the hour. They were no longer keeping time at all. By the second week of August, Clara Densmore had ceased reporting back to her editor. Her last telegram to Boston was sent on the evening of August 10th and read simply, "Still investigating. Need more time." Too many silences. After that, no further communication was received. What followed remains reconstructed only from her recovered notes, scattered in different locations, some left behind in Adeline Purser's home, others inside the margins of borrowed hymnals and school manuals. One page, torn from a school arithmetic primer and tucked between the slats of a church pew, read, "I watched them walk in rows again. This time they weren't led. They simply knew where to go." They walked toward the cellar door. The next day, Kinsey confronted Everett Lyle directly. The conversation was never recorded, but according to a third-hand account by Arlene Cooper, Kinsey was heard yelling inside the school at 10:30 a.m., followed by the sound of books striking the floor. Lyle emerged 5 minutes later, pale and calm, and walked the length of the hallway to his office, where he locked the door. Kinsey was not seen again until evening, seated on the front step of the Unitarian Hall, scribbling in a pad and staring at the bell tower. When Corwin finally approached him, Kinsey asked only one question: "Do they still know how to lie?" Corwin, after a pause, replied, "Not in words." That night, Adeline Purser, now growing visibly agitated, came to Densmore in a state of near panic. She said she had seen her own reflection delay in the mirror, blinking half a second behind her movement. She began scrubbing every mirror in the house with vinegar and lye, saying, "It's how they pass through." Densmore, trying to calm her, offered to take her statement. Adeline refused to speak further. She covered all reflective surfaces in linen and retreated to the pantry, where she remained until morning. By August 13th, the bells had adopted a new rhythm: 11 chimes at 11:11 a.m., then silence for 111 minutes, then a single chime. Children began tracing rings in the dirt during recess, always 7 in number, always spaced equally apart. A boy was seen writing the word "lowering" into the soot on the window glass of the general store, though he claimed not to remember doing it. The absence of Clara Fairweather, the missing girl, was no longer discussed. When Kinsey asked the school children if they remembered her, most said no. One boy, Henry Samuels, said there wasn't room for her. She was early. Densmore's next attempt to record the dreams failed. She tried interviewing 5 individuals she believed still retained independent thought: 2 parents, a teacher, and 2 mill laborers. All gave slightly different dream accounts, but one detail appeared in 4 of them: a heavy rhythmic sound like dragging wood. The 5th subject, the teacher, mentioned a lid being lifted and the air turning inside out. On August 14th, Reverend Fowle's trunk was discovered in the woodshed behind the Unitarian Hall. Inside was a series of notes written hastily in the margins of sermons. One read, "If the circle completes, there will be no we left." Another, "Their faces are ours now, but they don't speak the way we were taught to hear." Despite everything, no external authority arrived. Densmore sent another set of telegrams through a passing freight clerk, asking for assistance, but no answer came. Kinsey rode to Ashby himself, only to return the next day empty-handed. The roads had grown unfamiliar. "It took longer to come back than it should," he told Densmore. Like the way-in stretched longer behind me. The fields remained full of sun, yet no one harvested. The river was lower than it should have been, despite recent rains. At night, a low resonance began emanating from the cellar of the school, not loud but present, like a distant grinding wheel submerged in water. Densmore recorded it in a short letter addressed to no one, folded into her coat lining. "It's less a sound than a presence. It makes the walls hum. I don't know if they hear it, or if it's meant for us." On the morning of August 16th, Everett Lyle failed to open the school for the first time in 20 years. The children arrived, stood outside the doors in complete silence, and waited. At 9:05 a.m., the bells rang 13 times. The children turned in unison and walked to the mill, entering through the eastern loading dock. No explanation was given. The foreman later claimed the room they entered was sealed off, filled with disused machinery and rope coils. When checked that afternoon, no one was there. Corwin, now visibly altered, stopped writing in the ledger. He removed it from the apothecary and placed it beneath a floorboard in the hall. Densmore found the empty slot. She asked him directly why he had hidden it. He said, "They already know what it says." "I'm trying to forget." That evening, Adeline Purser vanished. Her room was left undisturbed. Her bed was neatly made. A single piece of string was nailed to the wall above her pillow, ending in a loop. The window was open. On her dressing table was a fragment of paper, torn from a hymnal. "We are but the mouth of the deeper song." Kinsey, now sleeping only an hour at a time, began walking the village at night. He said he could no longer distinguish dream from waking. "I think the rhythms are part of us now. It's no longer inside the village, it's inside the pattern." On August 18th, Densmore visited the school alone. The doors were unlocked. Inside, the rooms were silent. Desks were empty, but a faint smell lingered. Metal, coal dust, and something fainter, sour and vegetal, like rotting grass. On the blackboard was a single sentence written in perfect script: "Do not correct the silence." In the basement, she found the ladder. It descended farther than expected into darkness. She did not follow. Instead, she returned to the parsonage and began writing rapidly, filling the margins of old prayer books, lesson plans, census forms, anything she could find. "I am leaving this where no one wants it," she wrote, "because if they find it, it will stop meaning what it means." The next morning she was gone. Kinsey would be the last. On the morning of August 19th, the bells rang once, then fell silent for the remainder of the day. The weather was thick with humidity, though no rain fell. A film of dust covered the roads and window panes, unmoved by wind. Inside the village, no shops opened. Smoke rose from no chimneys. Yet Kinsey saw figures moving behind curtains. No one came to the door. He spent most of the day alone, moving from building to building with measured steps. His notes, later recovered from a tin box beneath the floorboards of the depot, describe a sensation of delay, as if each action in the village were being followed, not mirrored, but tracked by something he could not see. "There is a listening here," he wrote, "and now it wants to be found." That afternoon he returned to the school. The front doors were ajar, the hinges dry and creaking. The desks had been cleared, but faint indentations remained in the dust, tiny ovals where elbows had rested, hands had clasped, heads had tilted forward. The air was still, thick with the scent of dried ink, old wood and wax. No sound came from above or below. The chalkboard was clean. He descended the stairwell to the basement. The steps groaned with weight not his own. The cellar was larger than he remembered. The earth beneath his boots had been tamped down, smooth but uneven. To his left, beyond the old firewood rack, was the back wall. In the center stood the ladder. It was not wooden, but metal, fixed into the stone. It extended downward through a narrow shaft in the foundation, its sides damp with condensation. No air moved, but the space smelled faintly of mildew and rusted nails. Kinsey paused, then descended. There were 42 rungs. At the base was a chamber, stone-lined, circular, with a diameter no wider than 15 feet. The ceiling was low, reinforced with crossbeams, some splintered. Light filtered in dimly from above, glinting off a surface near the center. It was a table, not built, but carved, hewn directly from the stone floor. Its edges were imperfect, but the surface had been polished to a faint sheen. On its face were rings, 6 concentric circles intersected by lines that formed a 7-pointed shape. Small objects sat in each segment: a nail, a coin, a child's tooth, a piece of thread, a smooth stone, a piece of wax, and an empty vial. Around the table, in the wall itself, were shallow niches. Inside, 4 of them were journals. Kinsey opened the first. It was labeled EL in faded ink. The entries were irregular, terse, and increasingly frantic. August 3rd. The children know. They always knew. I only showed them how to sit still. August 7. She asked where the sound comes from. I told her it's beneath everything. That was not a lie. August 13th. The 7th segment is waiting. They said I must offer something unclaimed. That's the only rule now. The final entry was dated August 16th. It read, "No one will remember the ones who knew too soon." Kinsey opened the second journal. Its cover was embossed with a faint outline of a child's hand. The entries were scattered, but the same phrase recurred in different hands. "We go because it listens. We return because it tells. The third journal belonged to Dr. Corwin. He had written in dense, looping script. There is no pathology to what we have encountered. It is not illness, not mass hysteria. It is structure, a form built into behavior. It replicates not in cells but in rhythm, in order, in silence. Beneath that another line. The dreams are rehearsal. As Kinsey lifted the final journal, a dry metallic sound echoed from behind the wall. Stone grinding against stone. He froze. The temperature dropped. A faint wind rose from the shaft above, though no doors had opened. He turned. Opposite the ladder, where there had been solid wall, a passage now stood open. Narrow, lined with mortar and old boards, it curved slightly to the left, beyond the reach of light. He entered. The hallway descended gradually, the air growing denser. The smell changed, earthy, sour, and coppery. Moisture dripped intermittently from the ceiling. Somewhere deeper, a soft clicking noise repeated, irregular like bone tapping on wood. He walked for 5 minutes. Then the space widened. The final chamber was much larger, perhaps 40 feet wide, with walls of bare stone. Its center was sunken, 4 feet deep, and filled with dust, debris, and what remained of fabric, paper, and bone. Kinsey stepped forward. He counted 13 small piles arranged in a circle. Bones. Each was partial, fragmented, some charred. Cloth remnants remained, school uniforms, ribbons, a locket, a shoe. In the center of the circle was a depression in the earth, about 6 inches deep. At the bottom sat a stone disc, carved with the same 7-pointed figure. He did not write down what he felt in that moment, but he stayed. Footsteps came later. Slow, deliberate, measured. From the passage behind him, he did not turn immediately. When he did, there was only one figure. A child, small, barefoot, eyes wide. She did not speak. Instead, she pointed to the stone disc, then to herself. Kinsey knelt. The girl did not move. Her face remained expressionless. He opened his notebook, intending to record a description, but when he looked back up, she was gone. The wind had returned, but it no longer came from above. It came from within the walls. Kinsey climbed the ladder. As he reached the cellar, he saw that daylight had changed. The angle of sun through the boards was lower. He had been below for hours, though it had felt like minutes. He exited the school. The square was empty. The bells rang once. Then the voices began, distant, low, from the woods. Not speech, not chanting. Just cadence. The same rhythm he had heard in dreams he hadn't admitted to. He walked toward the sound. The forest edge at dusk was not quiet. It murmured, not in words but in timing. The wind moved through the birch trees in short bursts, each identical in length. Cicadas started and stopped together. Footfalls on the pine needles gave no echo. Kinsey entered without hesitation, guided by the faint rhythm he could no longer distinguish from his own heartbeat. As he walked deeper into the woods, the path disappeared beneath leaves, but his direction felt fixed. Trees thinned into a natural clearing, roughly circular, 15 yards across. At its center stood a structure. It was low to the ground, almost flat, formed of earth and stone and tree branches, woven together into an unnatural dome. No entryway was visible, only slats and knotted limbs covered in mud and old cloth, pale grey and matted with rain. From within, a glow pulsed faintly, as if from buried embers or smothered oil lamps. Kinsey circled it once. Near the eastern edge, the cloth curtain had lifted slightly, a crawl space just wide enough for a man's shoulders. He went in. The interior was colder, silent. Light filtered from slits in the ceiling, catching suspended dust motes in mid-air. The chamber inside was larger than it seemed from the outside, elliptical, with ribs of bent wood forming the walls. Around the perimeter, children sat. Kinsey counted 12, all seated cross-legged, all perfectly still, all facing inward. Their eyes were open, their mouths closed. Each child wore the same expression, one not of fear or trance, but something subtler: acceptance, recognition. In the center lay a shallow pit lined with stone. No fire burned, but the walls glowed with a low orange hue, pulsing faintly with the same cadence as the bells. On the floor between the children and the pit were objects, fragments of glass, iron nails, seed pods, bits of cloth, arranged methodically, as if each had meaning, nothing written, nothing spoken. Kinsey stood at the threshold, breathing slowly, eyes moving from face to face. He recognized none of them. But he knew they had been seen before, drawn on school pages, carved into tree trunks, murmured in dreams, and one of them held Clara Fairweather's shoe. She did not look at him, but her hand rested gently on the small leather sole, fingers barely curled. The child to her right held a fragment of bone, wrapped in thread. Another turned a coin over and over in her palm, never breaking rhythm. Kinsey spoke. "Who told you to come here?" No one moved. He stepped closer. "Are you safe?" No response. "Do your parents know?" The girl with the shoe turned her head toward him, slowly. Her lips parted. She said, "We came because they stopped listening." Then she pointed downward into the pit. Kinsey moved closer. Inside, embedded in the stone, was a mask, not a toy, not painted. A face carved from ash-gray stone, worn by age. No eyes, no mouth, just the form smoothed by time and touch. Around it, faint traces of soot or blood had darkened the grooves in geometric patterns. As he stared, he became aware of the sound again, not from the children, but from below. A steady ticking, not mechanical, more like knuckles tapping gently on hollow wood. He leaned in. There was depth beneath the pit, an air shaft or cavity, invisible but present. The sound grew slightly louder. The children did not react. Kinsey stepped back, but as he turned, one of the children stood. A boy, thin, face unreadable. He stepped to the wall and lifted a panel of hanging cloth. Behind it, carved into the earthen wall, was a door. Stone-framed, narrow, ancient, no hinges. At its center, the same seven-pointed figure carved deep. The boy touched the figure once. The ticking stopped. Kinsey froze. Then, from outside the dome, came footsteps. Heavy, adult. A voice followed, clear, familiar. "Kinsey." He turned. It was Dr. Corwin, backlit by the dying sun, standing at the crawlspace entrance. "You weren't supposed to find this yet," Corwin said quietly. Kinsey narrowed his eyes. "What is this?" "A correction," Corwin said. "A holding place. They've been building it for generations." "Who are they?" Corwin shook his head. "Not they. We. This is not an infection, Mr. Kinsey. It's a reordering. The children were never the problem. We were." Kinsey stepped between Corwin and the pit. "They're disappearing," he said. "People, records, time." Corwin nodded. "Because the shape is almost complete. Once the pattern holds, it will hold all of us. No more noise, no more forgetting." "You buried them," Kinsey said. "The ones who tried to stop it." Corwin looked tired. "They broke rhythm, they introduced dissonance." Kinsey reached into his coat and pulled out the journal marked E.L. Lyle was part of it. Corwin took the book, glanced at it. He wrote too much. But he understood. We needed something consistent, unchanging. The school was perfect, the lessons, the bells, the seating charts. Each step reinforced the pattern. Kinsey stared at him. "What happens when it finishes?" Corwin looked around the dome. "Then we remember what we were before choice, before speech, before noise." Kinsey didn't answer. The children rose, slowly, in unison. 12 of them now standing, forming a circle around the pit. The glow in the stone mask began to fade. Corwin turned toward the door with the 7-pointed star. "It's opening," he said. But it did not open. Instead, from deep beneath the ground, a new sound emerged. Not ticking, not humming. A slow inhale, massive, dry, like wind moving through bones. The children didn't flinch. The temperature dropped again. Dust rose from the floor. Kinsey took a step back, eyes on the pit. The glow was gone, the mask had shifted. Its orientation was now facing him, and it was no longer expressionless. Just a hint, a curve in the outline, something like a smile. Kinsey turned and ran. On August 23, 1887, 5 days after Kinsey emerged from the woods and boarded the outbound freight train without explanation, state officials received a sealed envelope addressed to the Massachusetts Bureau of Records. It contained no letter, only a hand-drawn map of Blackwood marked with 3 locations: the school, the Unitarian Hall, and the Ridge Clearing. Attached was a page from a child's notebook. The writing was faint, repetitive, and increasingly fragmented. The final line read, "We go still because it is not finished." Within 2 weeks, a state-appointed investigator was dispatched to the village. His name does not appear in official registries. No notes from his visit survive. What is known is that on September 2, 1887, a formal recommendation was submitted to the Massachusetts Board of Education and the Department of Public Health: immediate closure of Blackwood School, indefinite suspension of municipal functions, and redistribution of residents to surrounding districts. The report cited infrastructural failure, psychological irregularity, and pattern-based behavioral saturation. The language was clinical, detached, intentionally vague. On September 10th, a convoy of county constables arrived in Blackwood to begin relocation. They found only 46 residents. Census records from that year list Blackwood's population at 98. No graves were found. No new births were recorded. When questioned, the remaining villagers provided little information. They spoke in truncated phrases, responded in chorus, and referred to the absentees as "not here now, but counted." At least 3 families refused to leave their homes. One was forcibly removed. Another disappeared before removal was scheduled. The third was the Whitlow family, whose child, Grant, had been among the original 14 found kneeling in the shed that spring. Their house was empty when entered, but the attic walls had been painted in concentric rings, alternating in ash and chalk, with symbols etched into the beams. A mattress remained, unmade, with a small bell stitched into its corner. By mid-October, Blackwood had been formally dissolved as a district. The school was sealed, the hall boarded. Access to the ridge was restricted by county order. No arrests were made. No trial convened. Dr. Corwin's license was quietly suspended, though no charges were filed. He relocated to Bristol County and practiced privately for 3 more years before his name disappeared from medical directories. Everett Lyle was never seen again. The Bureau of Sanitation closed their file without public statement, and Clara Densmore's articles never ran. Her editor, Samuel Aldridge, would later claim in a sworn affidavit that he received an envelope postmarked August 20th containing 6 pages of handwritten notes, a strip of exposed photographic plate, and a line written in red ink. "Don't wait for clarity." The envelope, he said, was empty when opened. 3 months later, the Boston Morning Journal merged with the Gazette, and all regional correspondence prior to 1888 was discarded. Of those who remained in Blackwood, most were relocated to Fitchburg, Ashby, or the outskirts of Worcester. Many changed their names. A few, when interviewed by state agents, referred obliquely to what had been needed to balance the sound. One former schoolteacher, under questioning, repeated a single sentence 9 times before losing consciousness. It was not about belief. It was about remembering how to sit still. In 1890, an attempt was made to convert the Blackwood land into state-managed farmland. Bids were placed, surveys conducted, but each effort ended in delay or withdrawal. One surveyor reported that no measurements remained stable. Distances changed when rechecked. He described standing stones at the edge of the woods that had not appeared on maps. They bore no inscriptions, but one had a faint depression near the base, worn smooth, as if by generations of small hands. By 1892, the land was left untouched. Letters from officials requesting records of the school's final term were returned with blank pages. The stone dome in the clearing collapsed during the winter of 1888. The event was not witnessed. When a forestry team passed through the area the following spring, they found only a ring of scorched earth, surrounded by 12 depressions in the soil, each exactly 4 feet apart. In 1894, a man identified as Elias Trammell, the sanitation clerk who had once visited Blackwood, was admitted to a private sanatorium in Lowell. He had arrived at the gates barefoot, carrying a piece of slate with a message scratched onto it in chalk. "It's quiet now, but only on the surface." During treatment, Trammell sketched a map of a town that no staff recognized. He referred to locations by sound rather than name, where the first bell skipped, the hush of the third chair, the place with no echo. He died in 1896 of unknown causes. In the years that followed, Blackwood faded from maps. Its roads were removed from directories. Its parish registry disappeared from the Middlesex circuit. But among archivists, there remained whispers, files misfiled, dates reversed. A ledger with 4 pages bound in the wrong order, all referencing events that, when matched to national records, had no corresponding entry. No official acknowledgement has been made since. But every now and then, in the Southern Registry of the Massachusetts Historical Society, beneath the binding of an unlabeled volume, the same phrase appears in faint, almost erased pencil. We were meant to take turns, but someone kept waking up too early. In 1895, the state archivist assigned to consolidate municipal closures in Middlesex County reported a recurring issue. Documents from Blackwood resisted categorization. Ledgers contained entries in unrecognized shorthand. Some bore identical handwriting across different years, but signed by different names. One series of school reports listed perfect attendance for a class of 12 students between 1886 and 1887, months after the school had been shuttered. The archivist, Margaret Lane, noted that several of the records emitted a faint odor, like burned cedar or whetstone, though they were stored in dry, sealed drawers. She logged these anomalies in a private sidebook and forwarded the rest to the Bureau of Education. 3 months later, she resigned without notice. Her sidebook was never found. Her resignation letter consisted of a single line: "I think I've been holding the same pencil for too long." By 1896, Blackwood had become a case without precedent, officially dissolved, unofficially ignored. Government clerks spoke of it only in whispers, referring to it as the sleeping docket or entry 157, a reference to the filing number that refused to remain in sequence. Multiple attempts were made to expunge its records from the district registry, but each erasure resulted in duplication elsewhere. Notes appeared inside unrelated files: railway tariffs, census returns, marriage licenses, always handwritten, always in the same precise block letters used in the children's papers. These insertions were mostly short. "We are still seated. The sound is under your datebook. It was not instruction, it was arrangement. None were signed, none were traced." In November of that year, the Department of Health issued a quiet internal circular. All future references to the Blackwood event shall be sealed until reviewed by Bureau Counsel. No further investigative resources shall be allocated. It was the last known directive, but not the last sign. Over the next decade, 7 other towns across New England reported minor, isolated disturbances: identical dreams among school children, coordinated movements during chapel services, the spontaneous ringing of unsynchronized bells. In each case, no medical cause was determined. All reports were brief. And in all 7 towns, one feature remained identical: a building with an incomplete foundation, usually a cellar, sometimes a root cellar, sometimes a disused schoolhouse basement. In every case, stone walls bore marks too faint to photograph, marks that, when traced by hand, revealed 7 pointed stars. One such town, Dunnick Hollow, was surveyed in 1902. A note was scribbled in the survey margin: "Same spacing, same intervals, but they haven't started humming yet." The original bell from the Blackwood School was recovered in 1898 by a salvage team commissioned to clear the lot. It had no identifying marks. When struck, it emitted a pitch measured at 111 Hz, lower than expected for its size. It now resides in the state's artifact vault, unlisted and uncatalogued. According to a vault supervisor's logbook entry from 1910, its sound doesn't decay, it just stops. Kinsey was never found. His last known action, according to station ledgers, was boarding a freight train headed south under the name Henry Silas. He left behind no notes, no possessions. But a record survives in a collection of anonymous depositions stored in a courthouse basement in Lowell. One page, stamped confidential and signed by an unknown clerk, reads, "He said we were the interruption. That rhythm had been there longer than breath, and that once the final seat was filled, the door would close behind us, not in front." This page, oddly, appears twice in the file, One version is complete. The other cuts off mid-sentence, leaving only the words, "It will remember for us." In the years that followed, Blackwood's location became ambiguous. Older maps differ on coordinates. Modern surveys yield nothing but wooded hills, no signs of habitation or stone. The earth is unsettled, never firm underfoot. Trees grow in spirals. Birds do not land. In rare moments, hunters or surveyors report finding small piles of stone arranged in circles, always 7, sometimes with small trinkets inside: buttons, nails, chalk, ribbon. No town bears the name Blackwood today. But in the town of Kent's Hollow, 30 miles northeast of where Blackwood once stood, a substitute teacher in 1911 filed a behavioral concern after her pupils began placing their chairs in deliberate rows before she entered the room. When she asked why, they replied, "It helps us stop thinking." They denied ever saying it again. She resigned the following week, citing a sense of too much stillness. Her departure note was only one sentence: "The chalk kept breaking in the same place." In the archives of the Massachusetts Bureau of Education, one ledger contains the records of school districts decommissioned prior to 1897. On the final page, barely visible beneath the ink, is a faint imprint left by pressure from another sheet once stacked above it. It reads, "They're seated again. If this story moved you, if you made it to the end, it's because you also feel that these hidden truths must come to light. Let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. That way, we'll know how far these stories reach. And subscribe to the channel." There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering them. This story was reconstructed from documents that were found. All names have been changed to protect the source.